Muy buenas tardes. Hoy es miércoles 28 de diciembre del 2022. Tercera entrega del cargamento que se descubrió, que se decomisó por denuncia del propio piloto de un vuelo charter de una línea canadiense en Punta Cana. Ahora entramos en algo interesante. Ya vimos cómo la tripulación descubre la droga, la reporta, la DNCD se lleva parte de la droga, disque cogiendo de un huequito de 10 bultos, se llevan 6, dejan 4, y entonces tiene la tripulación otra vez que decía, pero se le quedaron 4 bultos ahí y di que vuelven a buscarlo. Pero cuando vuelven a buscar los otros 4 bultos, dejan preso a todo el mundo. 6 meses a gente preso, sin justificación, el fiscal pidiendo prisión, no le hacen una pregunta, no interrogan a nadie. Ese país, como tiene dolientes, un canal de televisión, una revista, deciden hacer una investigación porque le duele que ciudadanos canadienses estén pasando esta situación en una isla paradisíaca del Caribe que se llama República Dominicana, y donde se creía que la entrada al paraíso, las puertas eran por Punta Cana. Ok. Entonces esta revista comienza a hacer una investigación exhaustiva. Comienzan con la técnica de darle seguimiento al dinero, sigue el dinero, y comienzan a investigar cómo se rentó este vuelo charter. Interesantísimo. Pero eso no lo hace la DNCD, eso lo hace un canal, una revista que quiere llevarle la verdad a la gente y que quiere librar de ese sufrimiento a gente inocente. Y entonces descubren que el vuelo charter se había alquilado, era el segundo. Se habían alquilado esos vuelos a $100,000 y le decían a la línea Pivot Airline de Canadá que estaban rentando el avión y que iban a mover quizás decenas de pasajeros. Canadá, Punta Cana, Dubái. Lo traen 2 veces de Canadá para acá con 7 pasajeros, después con 4 y de aquí se van a sí mismos, pero se lo llevan fletado de droga. Gastan $100,000, usted dice, bueno, pero es una suma exorbitante, pues usted mover 4 pasajeros, que si se van en vuelo normal no consumen $1,500 o $2,000. Pero ahí está el negocio del narcotráfico. Entonces se dan cuenta de que una empresa que da un cheque, le dan seguimiento a ese cheque, le dan seguimiento a esa empresa y encuentran que esa empresa que está radicada supuestamente en Canadá, cuando pasa el caso, cierra su correo electrónico. Cuando van a la dirección, y esa dirección no existe, nunca existió, nunca estuvo ahí. Y le dan seguimiento a una persona que hizo 2 transferencias y es que tiene la villa alquilada para los tripulantes y los pasajeros. Y entonces, esa persona, cuando la sorprenden con las cámaras, se niega a hablar, cierra la puerta de su jipeta, de su camioneta y se va. Pero no obstante, de una vez cierra su portal que estaba online, cancela su número de teléfono y cierra su correo electrónico. Esta investigación comienza a cruzar a los pasajeros para ver cuál tenía cruce de información entre ellos, quiénes se contactaban, porque supuestamente le ponen un abogado a todos. Y el abogado, cuando lo entrevistan, dice que no, que él no le hace ese tipo de preguntas a sus clientes. ¿Quién te pagó el pasaje? ¿Qué tú buscabas para acá? Nada de eso. Y entonces hay un nombre, varios han tenido antecedentes por narcotráfico, hay un nombre que sí encaja en la empresa que da el primer cheque para alquilar el avión y la empresa y la persona que hacen 2 transferencias para pagar ese avión. ese está ligado a los dos. Sigue la investigación. El gobierno de Canadá se niega a dar información. En la República Dominicana no hay ninguna información. Una azafata, muy hábilmente, desesperada, se pone a ver por horas y horas el video que se le había suministrado a la fiscalía, que tenían sus abogados, y ve que a las 3 y algo de la madrugada cortan el video y vuelve 40 y pico minutos después. Pero los delincuentes cometieron el error que nada más cortaron ese video, no cortaron los videos de las otras cámaras. Entonces ya se va a las otras cámaras y en otros videos se ve cuando llega una camioneta, cuando hay unos tipos manipulando casi por alrededor de 40 minutos, unos bultos negros hasta que lo montan en el avión. Aparentemente ahí se salva la tripulación, pero yo pienso que la justicia dominicana y la DNCD ya avergonzada, ya no tienen cara para enfrentar algo que se está manejando entre gobierno a gobierno, entre Ministerio de Relaciones Exteriores con Ministerio de Relaciones Exteriores de Dominicana y Canadá, porque Dominicana le había pedido asistencia a Canadá para rescatar 2 mineros y ellos mandaron equipo, pero allá estaban atacando al gobierno porque tú mandas a rescatar dominicano en Dominicana, pero no puedes mandar a rescatar canadiense en Dominicana. Y por ahí va la cosa, señores. Y entonces liberan de esa pesadilla a toda esta gente. Corrupción al Desnudo sabe que aunque sea uno ahí, tenía conocimiento de lo que estaba pasando. Pero lo que criticamos es que no puede venir ningún organismo en ninguna parte del mundo y atrapar una tripulación completa sin investigar y decir aquí todo el mundo está preso hasta que aparezca quién es. Como si estuviésemos en la escuela. Tiraron un papelito. Nadie sale a recreo hasta que no aparezca o nadie diga o alguien diga quién tiró el papelito. No estamos en esos tiempos, señores. Y mucho menos se le puede permitir a una institución jugar con el prestigio a nivel de turismo que tiene la República Dominicana, porque eso afecta al país, por ende afecta a todos y cada uno de los dominicanos. Obvio que si ustedes le preguntan a Rafael Guerrero le va a contestar que la DNCD estaba castigando a esta gente por dañar esa ruta de narcotráfico, porque no había otra. Pero hay algo más importante. Es obvio que se saltaron muchos pasos de una buena investigación, porque usted, cuando un piloto o una tripulación reporta una droga en un avión antes de ese avión salir, si usted no tiene un operativo montado para apresar esa droga, se supone que usted tiene que comenzar pensando en la buena voluntad, en la buena toma de decisión de esa persona y en la inocencia de esa persona. Porque están reportando algo, no porque se asustaron, están reportando algo porque ellos lo encontraron anómalo, diferente, fuera de lo común. Y lo están reportando y lo ven como medio irregular y lo están reportando. Entonces usted no puede apresar la tripulación completa. Este era el segundo viaje. Parece que en el primer viaje habían coronado. Por eso quizás los miembros de la DNCD dejaron la mitad de la droga dentro de que se le había olvidado. Porque si llegaba a la mitad de la droga, por lo menos se salvaba el operativo. Y eso es lo que nosotros tenemos que seguir, insistir en este país. Que las autoridades dominicanas no se le puede permitir a nadie por rango que tenga que se involucre en el mundo del narcotráfico y el crimen organizado. Eso es tan sencillo como eso, señores. Aquí entrevistan en esta parte a un servidor. Vinieron de allá desde Canadá y nos entrevistaron. Nosotros le damos las gracias, nos dan los créditos en el video. Y nosotros en su momento, cuando concluyamos con esto, le vamos, que ya la iniciamos, una investigación para decirle lo que Corrupción al Desnudo en horas, en par de días, va a determinar de quién era esa droga, quién la montó ahí, de qué cartel era y cómo era la vaina esa, qué pasó ahí. Porque eso es lo que se necesita en este país. Porque a ese monstruo del narcotráfico hay que agarrarlo por la cabeza. Gracias.
The Dominican Republic isn't just a beautiful tropical island. It's also the first stop in the cocaine pipeline that moves drugs from Colombia through to the US and Canada. For tourists, the airport in Punta Cana is the gateway to paradise. And as it turns out, it is for narcos as well.
Los aeropuertos para los capos, para el narcotráfico, está totalmente abierto.
Rafael Guerrero is an outspoken anti-corruption advocate in the Dominican Republic. And on a drive through the capital of Santo Domingo, he describes corruption at the airports as widespread.
En todos los aeropuertos de la República Dominicana, en todos, están montando droga en los aviones. Pero Punta Cana es el paraíso. Punta Cana, al ser un aeropuerto privado, que los ricos llegan y nadie los revisa. Quizás el peor error que cometió la tripulación no fue decir, ahí hay droga. Lo peor es que no solamente se perdió la droga, ya se perdió ese método, esa forma de transporte.
The pilot's decision to say, look, there are drugs or there are bags in this airplane, it may have cut that route.
Estoy seguro, quizás están presos porque dañaron un negocio de mucho dinero. Cuando reportan esa droga.
This surveillance video is clear evidence that a Punta Cana airport vehicle was involved in loading the pivot plane with drugs. Who was driving this truck? Who edited the video? Our repeated attempts to find out if Dominican authorities are even investigating have been ignored. There are many unanswered questions as well here in Canada. What plans had been made to retrieve the drugs in Toronto had those duffel bags not been found before takeoff?
This plane is the same size as the one that's in Punta Cana.
Yeah, it's identical. It's the CRJ-200.
Eric Edmondson is the CEO of Pivot Airlines, based at Toronto's Pearson Airport.
You think that there are really only two options for where the drugs would have been taken off. That's on the ramp outside or here in the hangar.
Yeah, the most likely location was on the ramp outside, and certainly under the right conditions in the hangar here.
Pivot's CEO says there were two unusual occurrences involving a senior ramp manager who works for Signature FBO, the company that is essentially Pivot's landlord. The first involved a phone call the night the plane was supposed to land.
It was odd. They called to say, hey, I thought your airplane was supposed to come in. Isn't it here yet? Is it delayed? They called our maintenance guy, which was odd as well.
But why is that odd?
Well, in the 30 years of operating out of here, that's never happened. Generally, they don't care when our aircraft come and go. It's not a scheduled flight. When it comes, and when it leaves, it leaves.
But there's more. Eric Edmondson says that same Signature FBO ramp manager told them there would be maintenance in the hangar the day after the plane was supposed to land.
You were told that on April 6th that there was going to be work in the hangar out here. Expect more people than usual in your hangar. The plane doesn't come back, obviously, because they're detained. Did that work ever happen?
It never happened. So we found that to be, probably the oddest thing that happened in this whole Canada end.
Edmondson says they were so concerned that they immediately alerted the RCMP. W5 reached out to that employee at Signature FBO.
Hello.
It's Avery Haynes calling from W5 in Toronto.
And asked him about the strange phone calls and maintenance schedule.
I can't really answer that question because that's for my company to answer.
Signature refused to comment, so we don't know whether there's an explanation for those two incidents. There is another big mystery, and it surrounds the company that chartered the flight in the first place. They claimed to be a real estate investment firm called Trust Capital.
It's not like, narco criminal Inc. is going to charter your aircraft and say, we're going to go down to Punta Cana and run narcotics on your aircraft. They set things up so there aren't questions raised, and they did it very well in this case.
It looked official enough. In this first email from Trust Capital to Pivot Airlines, you can see a company logo with an office in Toronto. A man claiming to be John Strudwick, the chief financial officer, wrote that his firm wanted to fly potential clients from the US and Dubai to the Dominican Republic.
How much did it cost Trust Capital to charter that plane?
For that trip, it'd be about $100,000.
That's a pretty hefty bill.
It's a big investment.
And it wasn't the only trip. Trust Capital had organized a charter to the Dominican about a month and a half before the ill-fated trip to Punta Cana. Pivot was initially told there would be 10 to 15 passengers, but in the end, there were only 4. That means about $200,000 was spent on 2 charters to take about a dozen people to the Dominican Republic in a span of just 6 weeks. None of the passengers were from Dubai or the US. They were all Canadian.
None of this felt to you like this is a little bit shady?
No, not at the time. The size of the aircraft they chose was a little bit odd, but
why do you say that?
we have 50 seats and they only put a few passengers on there, but the itinerary when they first started was much larger.
The phone number Trust Capital used to organize the charter no longer works.
The number you have called is not assigned. Please check the number and try to call.
And their emails now bounce back. And this office in Toronto never existed. We did corporate record searches of Trust Capital and came up empty. This is a company that simply does not exist.
Okay, well, let's look over here.
And so producer Eric Cito and I decided to follow the money. $150,000 was sent in 3 separate wire transfers. The rest of the payment was made by check.
This is a photograph that Trust Capital sent to Pivot to show that they had paid the $49,000. But check this out. They obscured the name of the person who's sending it, so we're not going to get anything from the check.
We had a lot more luck with these payments, these wire transfers. There were 3 wire payments made over a span of about a month and a half. This numbered company they paid with, so we looked it up. Director here is Vic Mander out of Edmonton.
So it's a BC company with a director in Edmonton. Let's see if he's on LinkedIn. Vic Mander. There he is on LinkedIn, real estate investor.
We called and asked him about the wire transfers. And he hung up. And then Vic Mander's LinkedIn profile disappeared. And so we headed to Edmonton to try to get answers.
Hey, Vic. How you doing? Caitlin Haynes from W5.
Yeah.
Just trying to get some sense from you about why you chartered that flight to the Dominican Republic.
Sorry?
Why you chartered that flight to the Dominican Republic.
What do you mean?
Well, I know that your company spent $150,000 chartering that flight to the Dominican Republic, and I'm just wondering why.
Sorry, I got a couple of meetings to go to, so.
We're about to put a documentary on air naming you and your company, and I'm just wondering
Vic Mander had nothing to say about why his numbered company in British Columbia would pay to fly what Trust Capital claimed were foreign real estate investors on a charter that was very close to returning to Canada with hundreds of kilos of cocaine. And this luxury villa in the Dominican, our research suggests that Vic Mander was involved in booking it. So what, if anything, did the passengers know? Rahul Nanda is the Canadian lawyer representing them.
How do these 7 know each other?
They were friends from back home. Everybody was a friend from back home just coming on a vacation here. And that's what I know about all 7 of them.
But they flew on a charter plane.
Correct.
And how did that all transpire?
I don't know how that had transpired. I never asked those questions towards the passengers of how they got the plane and how they were coming down here. I didn't ask those questions.
He's been their lawyer since they were arrested months ago, but claims never to have asked who paid for their trip.
They have no criminal records back in Canada. These aren't drug smugglers. These are people who came to enjoy a vacation here. Was there any text messages? Any link to any drug syndicates? Any link whatsoever with any of these passengers who've ever been charged previously in Canada with drug trafficking offenses? Nothing.
But that isn't true. We did background checks on the 4 passengers on the first charter and on the 7 passengers on the second flight.
What did we find out about the people who were on Flight 1?
So Andrew Linden on the far left there, he had a possession for the purpose of trafficking charge that was stayed in 2021. Jordan Shaycaster, possession for the purpose of trafficking conviction in 2018. And Sean Kasinic, trafficking a controlled substance conviction, 2019.
So 3 people on that first flight with a very checkered past. Cash, interestingly, was on both flights. Does he have a criminal record at all?
Couldn't find anything, no.
Flight 2, to me, the most interesting person is Sheldon.
We looked at his criminal history. So get this, possession for the purpose of trafficking conviction in 2020.
And look at these text messages from Trust Capital to Pivot Airlines. They named Sheldon Poirier as an employee who headed residential development in Edmonton and Calgary.
So Sheldon is connected to Trust Capital, which we know doesn't exist, and Trust Capital is connected to Vic because he paid for that company to send all these people to the Dominican Republic.
Yeah.
These are the people we need answers from, and neither one of them wants to talk to us.
In fact, the most Sheldon would give us is the finger outside of court. Many of the passengers did everything they could to resist being on camera. And Brittany and Rania, who did speak to us about their plight in the DR, couldn't answer any questions about the Canada connection. They say they were told by their lawyer, Rahal, not to.
We think there was wire fraud. We think there was general fraud.
You gave the RCMP all of the information that you have about Trust Capital, including the CFO, the phone numbers, the text messages, the emails.
That's correct. Our assumption was that if they thought they should investigate, they would. To this day, we're unaware if they have or not. You know, I hope they have. There has to be accountability on this end, and I would hope that they took it seriously.
So are they? When we first reached out, we were told the RCMP does not comment on investigations being conducted by other countries. We replied that we're looking for information about potential crimes committed in Canada. Their response? The RCMP does not confirm, deny, or release information pertaining to active investigations.
Does it surprise you at the inaction both of the Canadian government and of the RCMP?
More so on the government side. I do think they languished 3 or 4 months unnecessarily because of the inaction of the government.
You believe that your crew was stuck on that island for 3 to 4 months longer than they should have been because of the Canadian government?
I think the government could have helped earlier, yes. The biggest period of disappointment came when Canada sent the mining rescue equipment to the Dominicans after the miners were trapped.
When the crew was about 4 months into their detention, the Dominican government requested and received help from Canada to rescue 2 miners who had been trapped underground for 10 days.
Canada's coming to the rescue of people who are trapped in the Dominican, who are Dominican, and doing nothing to help Canadians trapped there as well.
It was a slap in the face for the crew, and they took it very poorly, and they should have.
Our repeated requests for an interview with the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Melanie Joly, were declined. And then we were sent this statement. The government has been actively engaged in facilitating their return to Canada. Due to privacy considerations, no further information can be disclosed. It has been 219 days since the 12 Canadians were arrested. It's shortly after 9 at night, when news comes in that is, by this point, almost unimaginable.
Hey, thank you! Oh my God, oh my God.
Coming up.
Shock and happiness and bewilderment.
A sudden turn leads to long-awaited news.
I can't explain. Oh my God.
When W5 continues.